Hi, my name is Mark Bernard. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I actually want to talk about some economics, but more in terms of geopolitical economics, transactional diplomacy, and I'm going to weave in some interesting stories about history, and also, more important, fairy tales. Fairy tales tell you at another level. It's a language, it's a symbolic language, almost a Jungian level. So I want to break in with just a little bit of Russian history before I get into this transactional diplomacy as kind of buzzing around the cosmos and the you know collective unconsciousness. I want to talk something about Napoleon said first. I disagree with it. I believe we all add up to 100%. We're all equal. We're all equal in the eyes of God. But it's just some historical commentary. Napoleon Bonaparte, he said that if you scratch a Russian, you find a Tartar. What did he mean by that? Of course, Russian history, they were invaded by the Mongols, in the 1200s all the way to like the 1500s before they were able to throw the yoke of the Mongol Golden Horde off of them. It's not entirely all the story, but it tells you a lot about the political, geopolitical, and cultural mentality of Russia. Not modern Mongolia, not modern Asia, but back then, Genghis Khan, etc. So if you scratch a Russian, you find a Tartar. So an example of this that has been carried to modern day is, what about Ivan the Terrible? I've mentioned Ivan the Terrible. Why, Ivan the Terrible in the 1500s, he actually killed his own son with his bare hands. In the West, we had Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Titan. We had the High Renaissance. The Russians, they were just spiraling into this like darkness, already making a pact with darkness. And to them, Ivan the Terrible is like a formidable, the great man. And meanwhile, in the West, Da Vinci was building like helicopters and airplanes and painting beautiful things. Mona Lisa. I mean, that's a comparison. In the West, we had the Renaissance. Okay. Russia never had the Renaissance and Enlightenment, at least in not our understanding. So that's one thing that's one takeaway. But let's go deeper into some of the current ideas about this transactional economics. That was a little bit of a detour I had to get off my chest. Oh, I have another detour. And then we'll get into it. Didn't somebody in Washington say just recently, I thought I heard on the news, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm confusing the countries, that maybe Russia will someday be part of China, or maybe it won't. Didn't he say something like that? That Russia would be maybe part of China, or maybe it wouldn't? Or isn't that like Cuba? Didn't, somebody say maybe someday Florida will be part of Cuba, or maybe, California will be part of Russia. This is the type of language coming out. It would be funny, actually, if it wasn't sad. I think I'm mixing up the countries. You guys can let me know in the comments below if I'm mixing up the countries. But, arguably, China does have an argument for Russia because, there's a lot of them moving in. And, you have that quote by Napoleon and, the history. I think 1/5 of every Russian or at least 25% of Russian or 20% of Russian genetics are actually Asiatic. And so Napoleon was partially correct. So maybe someday Russia will be part of China. Isn't that? Maybe I'm confusing what was coming out of Washington, but you guys let me know. I'm sure you will. What I really want to talk to you about is, I'm going to tell you a fairy tale. And it relates to transactional economics and transactional diplomacy. Normally in economics, there's something called an arm's length transaction. Look how long and big this arm is. Yeah, okay, that's my action camera distorting it a little bit, even without the fisheye. And that means if I freely and choose to buy maple syrup from Canada, I can do it. I get consumer utility and value out of it. And the Canadians get, producer utility. When the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue, and marginal benefit and the marginal cost are equal, you have an arm's length transaction. Both sides win. That's why we trade. That's why we have free trade. If I don't personally, as an individual free consumer, want to buy something from, let's say, Canada, I don't have to. Okay. But that's not what's going on here. We have command and control economy taking over. We turn some dials and turn some knobs. And, that means tariffs, which of course skyrockets something called deadweight loss through the roof. Consumers and producers both lose. prices are distorted. And that's the mark of a macro turn the dials, command and control economy. Because in a free market, we do things at an arm's length transaction by our own volition and free will. And if I don't want to buy something, I don't. I don't even want to get into the trade deficits. But how does this relate to Russia and Ukraine? Because in order to enter a arm's length transaction, it must be of your own free will. These are individuals, right? And in the story, at least one rendition of Prince Charming and Snow White in the fairy tale, if you look at Davno Davno Temo, it's long, long ago. If you look at Disney's version, which was 2018, Once Upon a Time, Prince Charming was actually engaged to somebody else when he met Snow White. He was forced eventually to try. He was almost dragged to the altar to marry that girl. And Snow White, women have this sixth sense, smoked him out immediately. Oh, let me tell you, you're probably engaged to that B person. I can't say it, probably get because your father wants to marry another kingdom because of some transactional benefit or gold or whatever. And of course that was the case. And, Prince Charming was trying to rationalize and say, well, I have to do my duty and honor, and it seems like the best thing to do. He wasn't being the best version of himself. So in the Catholic Church and in pretty much any law, if you're coerced into marriage, if you're coerced into an engagement or relationship, that's not authentic, and that's not legitimate, and that's not real, and that's not legal, and it's not valid. So if somebody is in a, desperate moment and you want to get, let's say, I don't know, rare earth minerals, or you want to extract something, or you're negotiating with them, you're not really negotiating at an arm's length transaction. You're negotiating like Prince Charming's father did in saying he would end Snow White if he didn't go through with the marriage. Obviously, Prince Charming, the better version of himself and the better version of Snow White, is a very interesting story. If you ever watch this, Once Upon a Time, it takes in two realities. He escaped with Snow White, and he ultimately rejected the person who was trying to do transactional, I get something for something diplomacy. Maybe that would work if it wasn't such desperate situations and trying to coerce somebody into doing something. But even then, it's got to be not governments, it's got to be individuals. Like for the example I talked about with the maple syrup. There's also another character in that storybook, fairy tale, Once Upon a Time. I recommend you can check it out. It was this character called Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin was purely transactional, but he was always something, he just couldn't resist a deal. He was always something like, come on, Gary, just come to me. But, at least he had some goodness in him. He always warned the people before they made the deal. Like, I didn't come to you earlier because I didn't think you could handle the magic, because all magic comes with a price. He would always craft these deals. He just couldn't resist crafting these deals to get something for something. This Rumpelstiltskin. But he'd warn people at least. And so his deals were transactional, but more a little bit of an arm's length. They were not like I said before, Les Miserables, Fatine, who was selling her teeth and her hair, just people taking advantage of her. So how does this all relate to the geopolitical situation as I tell you these fairy tales and stories in Russia, Ukraine, in the US, and Europe? And Europe has a great attitude. Let me just tell you this. Economically, they have this thing called the EU. And EU payments come into Poland. And when Poland starts to get wealthier, they understand that initially, maybe Europe was richer, but Poland will rise up and contribute because that's the way economics works. You embrace people, you have a person or an entity or a country, you nurture them and build them and educate them and strengthen them so they later on, that's called childhood. So later on, they can contribute to the whole in the family. That's the EU model. It's not take advantage of somebody, not drag them. That was the German model. And that's another historical story I want to tell you about. Germany had this idea of transactional diplomacy, that in order to do business and guarantee peace for these countries, they would have to get something for something. And these countries I'm going to name are great allies and friends now. So please don't, take offense. They are great allies and friends. But didn't Sweden not get invaded because they were providing steel? Switzerland, gold and financing. Romania, obviously you could say it was all the long pro-axis, but it was providing the oil. And Finland, it had these strategic metals. Turkey, I could just go on and on. Italy. Basically, the deal was with Germany in the 1940s, the H guy, he said, I'll give you security. You just got to give me what I want. Sorry to make that analogy, but the idea here is if you're being the better version of yourself, think Prince Charming, Snow White, you don't do it on transactions. If somebody's down, and that's what the Bible teaches us. I mean, I don't know if you guys care about it anymore. The Good Samaritan, it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter where they came from. If they're down on the ground, if you lift them up, they will be grateful for you, and God will reward you in ways that you can't even imagine. So this transactional economics, which goes against classic textbook economics for many reasons, because you have something called deadweight loss and, tariffs. You can look all that up. Maybe I'm weaving a little bit of a lot of themes in here. You've got this idea that Russia has the facade of a European nation, but underneath it was really it's not an Asian nation, but it's that ancient Genghis Khan attitude. You just do not negotiate. You're not making any progress if you do. You think you are, and they may say you are, and they may say something, but you're not, because they'll just come back again at you. So think and meditate on Rumpelstiltskin, and I think you should watch that show and see what happens, the fate of Rumpelstiltskin, who always wanted something for something, what kind of person he turns into and what path it leads him on in life. And think about, your own country that you live in. Think about, we all want to be the best versions of ourselves. Think about Snow White and Prince Charming. Think about Napoleon's quote. Think about the H guy in Germany and his transactional diplomacy. Weave all these things into the idea and start to crystallize that if we want to, and the EU, their model is pretty good, I think. If we want to make the world a better place, it's got to start from this idea that governments are really just the collective unconsciousness of the people, and the people actually have the free will and the power to make choices on their own. And we don't need this top-down, turn the whistles and, engineer the economy and massage it in the direction we should. We all should be the best version of ourselves, make the world a better place. And in relation to Ukraine and Russia, the right thing to do is support Ukraine 110% without asking for anything in return. Because in the long run, like I said, God sees everything you do, and you'll be rewarded for it anyway. And that was the ideals of America. So let's hope it goes back to that. My name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. Have a great day. Thank you very much.